Every one of us has a unique contribution to make, and there's great value in belonging to an entity that is greater than ourselves. But the ultimate state is to make our unique contribution within the context of something which is far larger than the sum of the parts, as we shall see from the inauguration of the Mizbeach through the 12 representatives of the Jewish community in our parasha. After the Torah concludes the description of each one of the 12 Nasiim and their contribution to inaugurate the Mishkan, the Mizbeach, Ksiv the Pasuk says, so this is how they inaugurated the Mishkan on the day that it was inaugurated, that it was inducted. Meis Nisei Yisrael, that was done through the leaders of the community. Kares Kesef Shtei Esrei, they brought 12 silver bowls. In other words, summarizing the 12 silver kairos that were donated over the course of 12 days. So the Medrash al Pasuk Isa, that's why the Medrash asks the question. Surely that day there was only a single silver bowl that was brought by the Nasi of Naphtali. Says the Medrash, the Torah wants us to know that it was considered as if they had all donated on the first day of the inauguration of the Mishkan. Not only that, but beyond that, but the Torah considers it as if all 12 of them had collaborated and brought their offerings on the 12th day as well. And the Mefarshim explain what the Medrash is telling us. How do we know? How does the Medrash know that it's as if they all brought their karbonos or their kairos on the last day? That's because after the Torah summarizes all of the contributions of the Nasim, it says that this is the Chanukas, the inauguration of the Mishkan, after it was inducted. So we have to understand, what is the Midrash telling us? If the Medrash wants to illustrate that it's as if all of the Nasiim on behalf of all of the Shvatim contributed on day one of inaugurating the Mishkan, that makes sense. Gavra, both from the perspective of the donor, because you would assume that the person who gets to offer on the very first day that the Mishkan is available for business is obviously a very beloved and great person. So therefore, if you can say that everybody counts as being there at the first day, that's a compliment to everybody. As well as it's a big deal from the perspective of the Mizbeach itself, because mitzad Chanukas HaMizbeach sheyesh mokum lo mishakarbon shel hayomim haboim lachrei hayom harishin ein minyan shel Chanukas HaMizbeach, because you'd say that the subsequent days, day 2 to 12, are not really inaugurating the Mishkan anymore, the Mizbeach anymore, because it was already used on day 1. Because the Mizbeach was already being used from the person, the Nasi of Yehuda, Nachshon ben Aminadav, on the first day. So that would explain what the Medrash wants us to know. The Medrash is telling us that the Torah wants us to realize that all 12 of the Nisim on behalf of the entire Jewish population are all considered to have been there to inaugurate the Mizbeach the first time around, and they all get the value. We understand that. But what we need to understand is what's so great and what's the big chap that the Torah also considers it as if they all brought their karbanos on the last day. What's the big deal of being the last in line? Everybody is last in line. The explanation is this. What is bringing karbanos on the Mizbeach? It's representative of everything about how we serve Hashem. That represents the person bringing the karban, drawing close to Hashem. Karbanos v'lashen kiruv, as you see within the word karban, that it means kiruv. As is explained in multiple places. Now we also know the fact that David chose to split us up into 12 tribes represents the fact that there are 12 different streams of how we serve the Eibishter. Because we see that Yaakov gave each of his 12 sons, who are of course the beginnings of the 12 Shvatim, unique brachas, in order that each one should have a different way to be able to use their skills to serve Hashem. As you see in the brachas, you can see clearly that each one of the Shvatim is different, with a different angle that they engage in, which in turn reflects on a different way of serving the Eibishter. Which means we could say that serving the Eibishter is really 12 different unique parts. So therefore each Nasi on behalf of each Shevet has their unique way to serve Hashem, as there were unique gates to be able to enter the Beis Hamikdash. Which explains why in order to initiate the Mizbech, you had to have all 12 representatives of all 12 tribes, instead of having the two greatest leaders of the time, Moshe and Aaron, represent the entire community. Mishum, because each one of these Nasiim, when they went after the Mizbeach, they inaugurated the Mizbeach in their unique fashion, which represented their Shevet's way of serving Hashem. And they did so bringing karbonos that aligned with their particular mode of service of Hashem. Okay, the Medrash points us out, even though all 12 of the Nesiim brought an identical offering on the Mizbeach, the Medrash says, but each person brought it with a unique focus and a unique intention, which is aligned with who their Shevet is and what their ideology is. Their personal bracha. Each one of them brought their korban in their particular mind space. If you can have a look in the Medrash, it actually tells us which intention each one of these Nasiim had. That helps us understand. Every day of the 12 days of inaugurating the Mizbeach is actually a whole brand new form of inaugurating the Mizbeach. Something that was not experienced on any of the other 11 days. Each person is unique, each Shevet is unique, each inauguration of the Mizbeach is unique. With that logic, you can then say that the inauguration of the Mizbeach was not concluded until everybody's brought their korban, because until that you don't have all the pieces of the puzzle. Until every Nasi has brought his korban aligned with his philosophy. And has brought to the Mizbeach an initiation that is specific to his mode of service. Until that, there is no such thing as the inauguration of the Mizbeach. For an example, until the 12th day of the inauguration of the Mizbeach, there is no input yet from the unique perspective and platform of Naphtali. As we know, what Naphtali represents is this incredible speed and being able to share important and good news. Until he's brought his korban on day 12, that doesn't exist yet in the Mizbeach. Now, knowing that there are 12 streams and 12 different inputs of Kedusha in order to do the avoid in the Beis Hamikdash, now we understand the second part of the Medrash. Not only that the Torah considers it as if all of them had contributed on day 1, but more interesting to our conversation is that they're all considered to have contributed on day 12 as well. Yes, every single day of the Chanukas HaMizbeach brings a whole new angle and perspective and detail via the particular karbonos of the specific Nasi who's on duty that day. The first day has something very special, as we've already noted, and now we've learned that the last day also has something really special. But day 1 is opening the whole process of being able to initiate the Mizbeach. Not only is it just opening the process, but it also has this overarching theme. Besides the uniqueness of the first Nasi, which is Nasi L'Shevet Yehuda, because what's happened over here is we've got the introduction of an initiated Mizbeach that can now be used going forward. So that's a radical introduction of something. But at the end of day 12, you've got another asset, another value, which is it's only at this point that we could say now the Mizbeach is representative of the entire Jewish nation as a larger entity, an encompassing entity. That's what the Medrash has as its intention. The Torah considers it as if all 12 Nasim brought on day 1 and all 12 brought on day 12. Because every one of these Nasim was able to affect not only my personal input as the Nasi of this particular Shevet, without which the tapestry is incomplete, but every single one of the Nasim gets the value as if they were the ones who overarchingly made the Mizbech functional. Which means that in each individual stream you also have this encompassing of all the other streams as well. Now that we see that this is a teaching in Torah which is obviously emes, and that every one of the Nasim has the value of day 1 and the value of day 12, so that the value of initiation and the value of completion. Move on. The only way that could happen must be because every Nasi is a component of every other Nasi. And that's true both with regards to that initial push of inaugurating the Mishkan, the Mizbech, as well as the pulling it all together in the end, which happens on the last day. And we'll understand this better as we unpack the Sikha. And this is something that the commentaries on the Medrash point out a little bit later, where it says, not one person brought something in addition to what the other Nasim had brought. Because had any of them contributed something additional, then the one Nasi whose particular day for presenting himself, which is the Nasi of Ephraim, which happened to coincide with the Shabbos, would not have been able to bring his korban if there were differences between the korbanos across the Nasim. What does that mean? The only reason why the korbanos, which are brought by individuals, and usually an individual korban is not allowed to take place on a Shabbos, so how come the Nasim or the Nasi of Ephraim is allowed to bring his korban on Shabbos? Is because, as the Medrash has pointed out, that the Torah considers it as if every one of those Nasim brought collaboratively on day 1 and on day 12, and it's that string of connection that runs from day 1 of the inauguration to day 12 that links all of their korbanos together into one great communal sacrifice, and communal sacrifices do override Shabbos, and therefore the Nasi of Ephraim is entitled to bring his korban on Shabbos. How do I know for certain that when Shevet Ephraim gets up to bring their korban on Shabbos, it is not a personal but a communal offering? The proof is the fact that there is absolutely no distinction. Nobody is bringing any bonus items in their korban. The fact that every single one of those 12 days, the Nasim are bringing identical korbanos. That proves to us that the korban each day is not the unique offering of so-and-so the Nasi, but rather they are communal sacrifices. And obviously, if it's a communal sacrifices are always identical across the board. It's always the same tamid every single day. And in the same way over here, it's exactly the same compilation of items that are brought as the korban. But there's something we still have to understand. And that is, how is it possible, this concept, that it's now considered as if all of the Nasim actually are bringing a korban every single day, because each korban of each Nasi is considered a communal offering. How does that fit with the Medrash saying, but each one of the Nasim brought their korban with their own intention and focus? Well, either it is a communal experience or it's an individual experience. Let's look at it from the opposite angle. If each one of the korbanos brought by each Nasi is actually a communal offering, why do they need it on 12 different days? Why don't they just bring it on a single day? Especially when you consider that we know that's what the Nasim actually intended to do. Look at the pasuk. It says, that the Nasim, plural, all came forward to initiate the Mizbech on the day that it was going to be inaugurated. And the pasuk says, and they brought their carbon towards the Mizbech. So it implies that it was actually originally going to be this big single collaborative event on day one. And but then the Eibusha tells him that's not how it's going to work, and each Nasi has to bring it on their unique allocated day. Why? If it's a communal offering and everybody's sharing in the experience, why spread it over days? Clearly, the Torah wants us to know there are two separate principles and two separate structures running here. On the one hand, the karbanos of each nasi is considered a communal offering. And yet, simultaneously, each nasi has to bring it from his own resources. And we don't find, like by other karbanos, where you have to completely relinquish it, so to speak, to the Mizbeach, to the Kohanim, out of your own jurisdiction. Here, it's almost like the emphasis is the opposite way around. Make sure it's yours, make sure that it's your resources. And each time the pasuk specifically tells us it's the korban associated with so-and-so, the individual who is the nasi of his tribe. So the Torah is very clear about the fact that each korban brought by each nasi is distinct from the preceding or the following nasi, and specifically matched to his intentions. And that's why each one is on its own day, as we shall explain. So there is a paradox here. Communal offering brought very individually. But before we get to explaining this, there's something else about how they contributed that needs to be explored and examined. Just before, although in the same time frame, when they brought their korbanos, by way of introduction to the whole process of the Nasim offering their individual karbanos to inaugurate the Mizbeach, first the Torah tells us that they brought sheish eglei sov v'shnei bakar. They had to bring 6 wagons and 12 oxen. And the purpose of that was the Eibusha tells Moshe that those wagons and those oxen go to the Shevet Levi in order to transport the Mishkan. That also doesn't seem to make sense. First of all, this donation seems to have absolutely nothing to do with serving in the Mishkan, because obviously if you're transporting the Mishkan, it's not serviceable at that point. And it seems to have nothing to do with inaugurating the Mizbech. So why is this the time where the Nasim have to bring this particular offering? Another question. How does it make any sense that at the same time that we want each Nasi to bring his personalized offering to inaugurate the Mizbech, and it's got to be like aligned with his philosophy? Here, when it comes to this particular contribution, not one Nasi is bringing something which is actually whole in his own right. So his korban has to be his, and this donation has to be kind of completely split. Let's analyze the two factors of here. Every 2 Nasim brings 1 wagon. Why is there not each Nasi bringing his own personal wagon like he brings his own korban? And yes, you'll say that there were 12 oxen that were donated, and so therefore at that point the Nasim are actually donating of their own. Analyze it for a second. The truth is, to pull a wagon you need 2 oxen. So yes, you're bringing 1 ox each, but your 1 ox only does half the job. So this is a period of time where every Nasi is encouraged to bring his own korban with his own name attached to it, with his own intentions. Yet to introduce all of that, he's got to be involved in producing these wagons and oxen in a partnership with the other Nasim. The only way to understand all of these factors, individual or communal or sharing, is to understand what's going on spiritually. And that is that every single Jewish person, generally speaking, has 2 beautiful elements to them. So part of our assets are that which we share with all Jewish people. Shari Av Echad Kulano, we have one Father in heaven. So if you want to go really deep to the root of our soul, we all share a single soul, and that is a massive asset of being Jewish. On the one hand, so that you could say is our greatness. Based on the other hand, we have our own individual greatness. And those are aligned with the different groups and of course within those subcategories and then sub-subcategories of different kinds of Jews. You have some people who are the leadership, and some people are just the water drawers. Each one of those has certain advantages that the other doesn't. And the interesting thing is that even when we're looking at people so individually and recognizing their unique assets, that actually brings to unity. Because when we realize you have assets that I don't have, and I have something that I can contribute to you, then we realize that we all are interreliant. And no person is an island. No person can be whole alone. Maybe that's going to encourage me to be connected with and united with other Jews because we all need each other. As we well know that if you take all of the Jewish people and you put us together, it creates a single mega organism. So there's two realities now. We're part of a bigger whole, and we contribute to the bigger whole in our unique way, and each one has an advantage. I'm looking from the perspective that we all share one essential root neshama. The degree of unity is immense. Because why are we then united? Because fundamentally we're the same entity. Whereas if I'm looking from the other perspective, I'm not saying that we're intrinsically united. I'm saying we are united in the sense that we all collaborate and contribute to each other. Which of course emphasizes that we're actually distinct from each other, but networked and reliant on each other. So the milah of that is fundamental unity. But on the other hand, bringing everybody together as a tapestry of alliances and contributions to each other has its own advantage. Because then my contribution is real. I am helping to make the reality of a unity by what I contribute. Even when you look from my perspective. The one thing that I know, I feel is my value. Even when I'm looking at my assets, my greatness, I'm still able to recognize that I'm incomplete without somebody else. So therefore, what's the ultimate? The ultimate is that the two milas should combine. In other words, that even when I'm looking through the lens of saying, I see what I have to contribute, simultaneously I should be acutely aware, not only that I also need you because you have talents that I don't have, simultaneously, while I'm recognizing my greatness, I need to feel our intrinsic oneness. What does that mean? Where the Alter Rebbe explains this principle, that we have a unity due to the fact that we all completely require or rely on each other. Because none of us is complete without the other. The Alter Rebbe then adds words which are fascinating words. That by being conscious of the fact that I'm not complete without you and you're not complete without me, and I help you and you help me, says the Alter Rebbe, eventually you reach a point of achdus, of unity, which is without being able to tell top and bottom, beginning and end. And there the Alter Rebbe relates us to a very powerful and elevated spiritual state, which is called igulim, where things operate in infinite loops, where there's no sense of beginning and end, very much like when we dance in a circle. What the Alter Rebbe is saying doesn't immediately make sense, because when I speak about the fact that every one of us adds value to complete the other. So I need your input, you need my input. To the extent that even if somebody's at the tail end of the Jewish community and is the so-called feet of the community, they add value to the person who's the head of the community. In what way? Because legs transport you, the head can't go anywhere. As well as legs support you, the head cannot stand. So I get it. I'm the feet. You're the head. You add value to me. But how could I possibly then lose sight of who's the head and who's the feet, who's the top and who's the bottom? Surely that doesn't make sense. The whole principle of this unity is recognizing every person's value. Clearly there the Alter Rebbe is now teaching us that there is a third dimension. Dimension one is we're intrinsically connected and it's absolute that we're united and we just have to recognize it. Dimension number two is to say we each have value and we contribute to each other, which creates another layer of unity, which is not just simply intrinsic, but it's actually created through our efforts. Says the Alter Rebbe, now there's a third dimension, which blends together the two different types of achdus that exist. This is the recognition of the fact that those specific, unique talents that I have are not separate from the essence of my being. To the contrary, these unique values that I bring to the table are an extension, an expression of the essence of my neshama. The essence of my neshama contains all of the potential individual elements within it. And because every detailed facet of my being is an outgrowth of the essence of my being, that's why every part of me is like DNA containing all of the subparticles of the rest of me. To put it differently, because where does every facet that I have initiate? Where does my intellect come from? Where does my creativity come from? Where does my critical thinking come from? Where does my emotion come from? Where does my physical talent come from? All from the essence of my neshama. The essence of the neshama contains within it every possible variation of personal koiches. Therefore, if I could get down into the nucleus of every one of my talents or abilities or assets, I would discover within them the nucleus of every of the other talents and assets. And we can extrapolate that out to refer to the whole Jewish people as the single mega organism. Why is it that we need all these different people plugging in different aspects to make this tapestry of the Jewish people, without which we could not survive? The reason is because fundamentally we're one. So now we're putting the two principles together. Principle number one was that our achdus is absolute and intrinsic. Principle number two was that our achdus is an outgrowth of the fact that we all contribute to each other. Principle number three is how do we have the ability to contribute to each other? Because we're fundamentally united. Because that's where we derive these unique contributions from our essence, which is a shared essence. So therefore, the unique talent that an individual brings to the table is within it contains all of the midas of the entire Jewish people. We're fundamentally connected. Now it's ofen shal achdus that generates then a form of unity as Jewish people. Whether it be the unity because we're intrinsically connected, or even the unity because we all contribute to the greater picture. In a way, as the Alter Rebbe describes, where you cannot tell what's the beginning and the end, the top and the bottom. Because this is a phenomenal thought. Because when we're looking from this perspective, the person who's the great intellect and the person who's the simple Jew, neither has a mile over the other. Where does that incredible intellect come from? The essence of the neshama. Where does the simplicity of this Jew come from? The essence of the neshama. Yes, the intellect contributes in a way that the simple Jew doesn't, and the simple Jew in a way that the intellect doesn't, but fundamentally it's the same thing. They are expressions of the essence of the neshama. Every single Jew has every single value and asset. The difference between one Jew and another is who has it as a visible, expressed asset and who has it as a latent potential asset. So I have this particular asset which you could see and you're like, wow, that's amazing. And you have another asset that I look at and say, wow, that's amazing. And we both have within us all of the other pieces of the puzzle. It's just that these are the ones that are dominant within each of us respectively. And a nice way to illustrate this is in the principle that tells us if a person is engaged in a particular mitzvah, they're exempt from another mitzvah. Why is that? Says Chassidus, it's because every mitzvah fundamentally contains all of the details and energies and meaning and achievement of every other mitzvah. So, to the human eye, you see a person, the person is doing mitzvah X, and that's all they're doing, just mitzvah X. But from the Eibishter's perspective, looking at the essence of what a mitzvah is, that it has the DNA of every other mitzvah that exists, doing that mitzvah right now is considered as if you're doing all of the mitzvahs right now. And that will explain the order and how it played out when the Nasim had to come to contribute to initiate the Mizbech. In order that the Mizbeach should be initiated in the best possible way, where to take the two extreme possibilities and bring them together with this Kosev HaShlishi, with this third higher dimension that illustrates how they both share a reality. On the one hand, we need the contribution of each Nasi as an individual representing their Shevet's unique approach called Echad ve'Echad Hikriv Lifi Daita, as the Medrash said, each one brings their korban with their particular focus and intention. Which also explains why each Nasi is on a different day. But simultaneously we need the other end of the scale. Each Nasi, while they're operating in their own personal circumstances, with their unique perspective and their contribution, has to be acutely conscious of the fact that at that moment, as in every moment, this person is absolutely one with the rest of the Jewish nation. That's what the Medrash is telling us. That every one of them, on the day that they're bringing their personal korban, it's as if it's day 1 with everybody or day 12 with everybody. As we already mentioned, that's because even though there's an individual bringing the korban, it has the status of a communal offering. Because each day on its own had the unique contribution as if it were everybody together. That also explains why each Nasi brought the identical offering. Because that then again illustrates in quite a stark way the sense of communal activity and communal contribution. And as we mentioned, it's the same process, but when it's Yehuda bringing it, you see this part of it, and when it's Yisachar bringing it, you see that part of it. But it's the same contribution that's being made. Incredibly valuable perspective and how we should identify the value of each Jewish person. And that then will help us to answer the question we asked earlier, which is what do the wagons, which are for transporting the Mishkan, have to do with inaugurating the Mizbech? In order to facilitate this incredible unity. To the extent as Alter Rebbe describes, where you can't even tell who's top and bottom. While you are personally engaged in your personal avodah, to get there, so the Nesim had to then bring an offering, a donation that would express this theme, and would be the result of this incredible unity that is way beyond the unique distinctions of each person. And they had to do it at the beginning, because that would then inject the potential for them that when they stepped up as individuals, they would not be just simply individuals, they would be carrying that essence of unity that exists. That's why they first donate these wagons. How do they donate the wagons, as we've seen? Each nasi only contributes to half a wagon. And in order for the ox that I'm donating to actually do its job, it needs your ox to pair with it, because you need a span of 2 oxen. That drives home the message. Nobody is an island. You cannot do this avoid on your own. Your avoid only works when the other person is connected to you. And that's why the Nasim all came on a single day and gave their contribution to these wagons and the oxen as a collective. And even when Moshe Rabbeinu took and received those wagons and those oxen for them, there was no record of this one came from that tribe and that one came from that tribe. Torah doesn't say that. Just went into a collective pot. Once we've established that message, absolute unity, and we all contribute to that unity, then you can inaugurate the Mizbech, which plays out with each Nasi stepping up with their unique contribution of a Teich. So it's no longer a whole series of 12 individuals, rather it's 12 manifestations of a fundamental unity. That's how it is in a Jewish person, and it is also reflected in the Mishkan structure itself. And now we've identified these 3 aspects within a Jew. First and foremost, that at our core, we are absolutely united. Yet on the other hand, we each have unique talents and contributions that we have to make. And then the highest level is where we link the two, that essence of our connection is what guides and plays out in our personal contribution. Those 3 themes are reflected in the Mishkan as well. Aleph, on the one hand, you have Akadusha Klolis Shel HaMishkan HaMakif Eskol HaMishkan. There's an overarching sense of holiness that belongs to the entire Mishkan. Kol Chalakov Uprata B'Shaveh, and every part of the Mishkan is part of that collective. Then there's specifics. Then there are parts of the Mishkan that have different degrees of holiness. The courtyard is one layer. Is a higher level of Kedusha. Is the highest level of Kedusha. And then Gimel, there's Yichud Shtei HaKedushas B'Yachad. There's the bringing together of those 2 very distinct forms of holiness, a generic holiness and a specific holiness. And when you bring those 2 together, the unique holiness of each dimension is enriched. And you're actually going to see this reflected in a very intriguing way in what the Medrash Rabbi has to say about the donation of Shevet Shimon. Shehikriv says the Medrash that Shevet Shimon brought Al Seder Maisa Mishkan to represent the order in which the Mishkan was structured. We're going to pick out the Lashon of the Bamidbar Rabbah. Ka'arois, the silver bowls that they brought, they represent the courtyard of the Mishkan. Show you makifas Mishkan, which, remember, the design in the Mishkan is that the chatzar encompasses the entire Mishkan. What are the dimensions of the chatzar? Shloshim ameh mishkala. So the weight of these silver bowls was 130 pieces of silver. And that relates to the fact that Torah tells us that the length of the chatzar was 100 amos. And the Mishkan inside it is 30 amos long, so 100 amos of chatzar plus 30 amos of Mishkan equals the number 130, which is the weight of the silver bowls. Then they had these other types of bowls that were out of silver. That's Mishkan. That corresponds to the size of the chatzar without the Mishkan, which is 70 amos. So now, what have you got? You've got 100 amos of length of the chatzar, 30 amos of Mishkan. So delete the section that is against, that corresponds to the 30 amos of the Mishkan, leaves you with 70 other just chatzar length. And that relates to this particular bowl that is 70 shekel weight. Dovar acher, and then the Medrash offers a third possibility. This is a little bit complicated. The chatzar is 100 amos long, 50 amos wide. Says the Medrash. Okay, so 50 wide and 100 long. So take away the 50 width from the 100 length. That leaves you with 50. Cut that 50 into strips, and then turn that into a square. You'll end up with a square which is just over 70 amos, about 70 amos. And that's why these mizrakas are 70 shekel in weight. This is such a strange calculation. Aleph. The first calculation is saying there's 100 length of the Mishkan plus 30 length of the of the Chotzer plus 30 length of the Mishkan. How do you do that? The 30 length of the Mishkan, those 30 amos, are included in the 100 amos of the Chotzer that are outside and beyond and encompass the Mishkan. How do you count it twice? To come up to 130 amos in total. It's not 130 amos in total. It's 100 amos in total, of which 30 amos are occupied by the Mishkan. Question 2, base. Now, if I'm saying that 130 amos is the total length of the Chotzer plus the Mishkan, why then is there another offering, the Mizrach, which is supposed to represent the length of the Chotzer without the Mishkan? Who needs that? We've already counted both of them. Gimel, what's the thinking of the third opinion that says the 70 shekel, that is the chotzer without the, it doesn't say it's the chotzer without the mishkan, it's the whole chotzer, but then you split it in half because you're dividing the length by the width, and then you land up with fractions which the Medrash just chooses to ignore. But based on what we have learned, these three potential calculations of how you determine the size of the Mishkan, either you're looking from a perspective of 130 amos, which is which is the length of the Mishkan plus the length of the Chotzer. So in other words, you're covering the length that is Chotzer with Mishkan inside, and independently the length of just Mishkan. Then you have another calculation which is based on Chotzer B'lo Mishkan Shivim Amma. You're just looking at the Chotzer, pretending that the Mishkan is not relevant to the calculations, and that gives you 70 Ammas. And then Gimel, you have Mea Amma Shel Chotzer Shabbat Nichol Orech HaMishkan and Behesen Shlosh Sonyonim Ana B'Kedusha HaMishkan. So it's a Mea Amma Shel Chotzer, and then you've got the 100 Ammas just of the Chotzer itself. So these three calculations relate to the three aspects of what the Mishkan is, which reflect the three aspects of what a Jew is. When we're talking generally about the holiness of the Mishkan, from that perspective, I'm looking generally at the size of the Chotzer, which is the footprint of the Mishkan, and that's 100 Amos. That incorporates the whole Mishkan in a single entity represented by the Chotzer, which is 100 Amos. When, however, I'd rather illustrate that there are different levels of Kedusha within the Mishkan, there's the Chotzer, there's the Kodesh, etc., then we calculate which stretch of the Chotzer does not align with the Mishkan, so that's 70 Amos. That's illustrating that the Chotzer has a different and actually a lesser degree of Kedusha than the Mishkan itself has. But if I put the two together, in other words, acknowledging that the Mishkan has value, and acknowledging a type of holiness, and acknowledging that the Chotzer has a different type of holiness, and I put them together, that gives me 130. That means I'm looking firstly from the perspective of 100 Amos that looks at the entire thing just as a single entity without highlighting the Mishkan. And simultaneously I'm looking at the Mishkan as its own value. That's exactly what we've been talking about. There's this over-encompassing holiness, like the over-encompassing unity of the Jewish people, represented by 100. There's the unique contribution that we each make, represented by looking at the Chotzer independently of the Mishkan. And then there's the collaboration of the two, which is represented by the number 130. The Mishkan representing that uniqueness, the Chotzer representing the encompassing holiness, and the two are aligned with each other. Therefore, when the Nasso of Shimon, which the Medrash identifies as the Nasso who brought his offerings to represent, because remember we're talking about the focus and intention that each one has. So his focus and intention is to represent the structure of the Mishkan. And of course, each one of the Nasiim is aligning with the three principles of unity that we've discussed about a Jewish person. The particular meditation of the Nasi of Shimon, Shlumiel ben Tzur Shadoi, is to say what? I am bringing these korbanos with those specific intentions, how the Mishkan aligns in 3 different types of holiness with the 3 different types of unity within the Jewish people. And that explains why there are 2 opinions in the Medrash. Do we arrive at the number 70 amos to relate to the Mizrach, which is 70 shekel of kesef, by ignoring the section of Chotzer that is parallel to the length of the Mishkan? Or am I taking a rectangular Mishkan and reconfiguring it to create a square, which is going to give me this 70 amos area? So the first opinion, which says, look at the Chotzer excluding the part that overlaps the Mishkan. That would be the attitude that says the most important thing to inaugurate the Mizbeach is Mailas HaPrat, seeing the uniqueness of each individual contribution. This Chotzer without that Mishkan. Where the Achdus has kind of expressed itself through the uniqueness. We all contribute. We all have a part to play. So therefore, the overarching fact that the whole precinct is holy is not what I'm looking at. And here I'm actually looking at the message really of the Agolas, which is, let's all come together and do things that we can't do without each other. So that's what it's saying up here. We need a Chotzer to recognize there's a Chotzer. Yes, of course you can't have a Chotzer without a Mishkan, but we need to recognize the Chotzer, because it also has something to contribute. Whereas when I go with the other opinion, which is take the 100 length and the 50 width and mix it all up into this interesting mathematical calculation to create a square, which is going to be 70 and something amos, there the intention is Mailas HaKlal. The main thing I'm focusing on is the overall value of the whole Mishkan. In that case, the message would be to say that bringing all of these offerings to inaugurate the Mishkan is to show us that even when I'm an individual coming up to bring a korban, or I'm an individual part of the Mishkan, really what I'm conveying is the bigger picture, the greater unity. And from that perspective, I'm not highlighting the unique contribution of each part of the Mishkan or the unique contribution of each Nasi. And therefore, the way that particular medrash works, or part of the medrash works, is to calculate an overall area of the Mishkan, without focusing on which part of the Mishkan gets higher Kedusha, Mailas HaKlal. From that perspective, I'm looking at the overall great holiness. Take-home message for us. We need to know fundamentally that every one of us comes from an absolute oneness. We need to know that each of us contributes in a unique way that nobody else can contribute, and therefore we all need each other. And we need to know that the fact that we need each other is not because I have what you don't have, but rather that we all have the entire reality of our unity, but some parts are dominant in me and dormant, and other parts are dominant in you and dormant. And so, by us contributing and collaborating together, what we're actually doing is we're bringing out the unity that is fundamental to all of us, by recognizing we are all like one big spiritual DNA, that every one of us has every one of the relevant components to be able to achieve what the Eibishter wants. And when, of course, we come together, that the Eibishter blesses us when we are as one, and then we can be immediately zoiche to the Hisgalos of Mashiach, where obviously we will see all of the greatness within ourselves, all of the greatness of our unity, and most importantly, the fact that we are from one absolute single source.